Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are listening from. And welcome to 1% Better, where we take a look at hidden stories in sports. I'm Xylon and I'm joined by Dr. David Lipman. Your medical question today. And I want to tell me if this is correct, if you know the answer and if it's correct. What fluid does the human body produce more of during a long endurance event that actually changes the composition of your sweat over time?
Is it just, are you talking about plasma? Is that what you're talking about? Where it's longer term, or are you talking about just water, like fluid?
So this is what I have. Aldosterone triggers the kidneys and sweat glands to reclaim sodium. So sweat becomes more dilute, the fitter and more
Yeah.
heat adapted you are.
I think the word you're looking for is aldosterone.
Aldosterone.
Yeah, so that's a hormone. It's not a fluid. So
I like how you didn't
that's
know
a
the answer and now you're correcting me. Like you know the answer because you know the pronunciation.
well, I know what it is, and you clearly don't. So aldosterone's
What
a
is it?
hormone. So what happens when you have low blood pressure? The kidneys release renin. This gets converted in the lungs to angiotensin, and then you end up with aldosterone downstream of that. And aldosterone helps us to retain fluid, basically, to ensure that we don't get low blood pressure, right? So this is that's not the real short answer to that question. It's called the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system. One of the key blood pressure medications. There are two key blood pressure medications. One is called an ACE inhibitor, which is ACE standing for angiotensin converting enzyme. So this blocks the conversion of angiotensin to aldosterone in the lungs, and thus prevents our blood pressure from going up. Or lowers our blood pressure. The other one is what's called an ARB, angiotensin receptor blocker. So this blocks the effects of aldosterone. Sorry, maybe it's angiotensin. I'm not sure. I can't remember. My pharmacology was never great, and I'm sort of a little bit here. Might be aldosterone.
Well,
Anyway, point
we'll let
is,
your pass go this time. You didn't know the answer, but you knew what it did. So we'll let your pass go. You passed the test.
I mean, if the question's wrong, then the answer can't be the answer can't be wrong. But anyway,
Do you know what? Maybe listeners should start. You complain about my questions all the time. I want to see if listeners agree or not. Maybe they should start submitting questions. David can't see our DMs on Instagram, so DM us on Instagram. 1% better pod if you have a doctor's question. He can't see it. Send it to me. I'm 100% sure listeners will come up with better questions than I would. On that note, too, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, please do so. We know a number of loyal listeners who have not subscribed yet. It will really help our analytics and the numbers. So please do so now. We are supported by Precision Fuel and Hydration. Did you manage to catch Ironman Hamburg over the weekend? They had a lot of athletes doing well over there.
it just was a wrong day for me. I was like traveling and stuff. I caught like maybe 30 minutes of the run, and at the time Solvay was in the lead
Same. Yeah.
unassailably. Laura Philipp was running through the field, and Marjolaine Pierre was dying. So I was like, okay, I kind of know how this plays out here. But I mean, listen, it looked like a really good day in general, but then certainly for Precision. So Solvay obviously took the win in 8:11. She ran a 2:49 marathon, which is pretty impressive there.
Wow.
So I mean, sub 8 and low 8s are, it's kind of like sub 8 is a project that was done. I don't know if anyone's gone sub 8 in a competition. I don't think they have, but low 8s is pretty impressive. I saw some stat and I forgot to look this up, but something like Solvay's got 3 of the fastest 10 Ironman times of all time. And what I wanted
Whoa.
to, and I think Laura Phillips got 2 of them. Kat Matthews has got 2 or something. But the point I was going to get to is like Solvay's only done about 4 or 5 Ironmans. So like her strike rate is unbelievable for fast ones. So, granted, 2 of them have been in Hamburg. So, like, take what you want from that. But anyway, it's really impressive from Solvay. Obviously, a superstar of sport, current world champion. She beat Laura Philipp, who was second. She ran a 2:42 marathon. So, obviously, a much faster run, came through the field pretty well. Solvay got
It's
off the
very
bike in
close in the
front.
end, actually.
Yeah, yep. And then Katrine Christensen, another precision athlete, got third. So she's coached by Christian Hogenhaug, and is a relatively, comparatively small name in the sport. But I saw Brad from Precision pick her to do well this race, and obviously he's got a good eye for it. I think he's an ex-pro triathlete himself, pro Ironman, so it doesn't surprise me he picked her. But that was pretty impressive. And then Marjolaine Pierre, we've talked about her before. Has done really well at 70.3 distance, not quite as well in the full distance, although she did do well at World Champs a couple of years ago. I think she got seventh or something, but she ran a 256, which is a huge upgrade in the run for her. She took off on the bike and was just away. She just went forward on the bike. Obviously, Sylvain eventually rode her down, but she's doing really, really well, Marjolaine. So she's still young, so lots of time to develop. So very exciting day and great day for precision, as we said. So I think Sylvain uses a predominantly liquid strategy, like the rest of the Norwegians do, given their sweat rates and all the heat training they do. But could be wrong on that. I'm sure she carries some emergency gels. But if you want to be like Sylvain or the rest of them, or me, I got my delivery through the week. Which was great. So I got my chews and got some tablets. So ready for a summer of the trails. But yeah, if you want to be like all of us, you can use a code. It is better2026, all in capital letters. Or you can follow the links in our show notes. That'll automatically apply the discount code. That is for 15% off your first order.
I saw in our bonus episodes that we're putting out this week with Ato Verbier about ketones, you were holding up your brand new precision delivery that arrived there. I was very, very jealous. What's been going on with you? You were in the mountains over the weekend. Did you get to run there?
Yeah, got out. It was really nice. There's a trail that has been closed since I got there that I've always wanted to take, and I've managed to get my way across it. It was kind of less closed, let's put it that way, which was nice.
Looked
And got out
amazing
for
in
some.
your photos on Strava, I must say.
Yeah, that was a different trail. That was somewhere I'd never run before that Megan took me to. It was really cool. So it's a little bit away, but it was really, really fun above Lac Montrion there, which was stunning. Some real steep stuff and some couple sketchy bits, but it was really good. Really nice day out together, which was good. But ended up with a tick bite, so that was a little bit concerning. So I had to action that, and good news is like it's all good. But it was a moment of like, oh, I'm not so good with this anymore. I don't really know what I'm doing here. I've never really been great with ticks because they're not a big thing in Australia, but I had to do a little bit of work with tick stuff in my prep for the USMLEs when I sat them. So yeah, I had what they call a burden of knowledge, which is all of the potential disasters as a result of it, the worst case scenarios. So you freak out a little bit. So yeah.
What happened? Did
But
anything happen? Did you die?
well, obviously not, mate. But so nothing much. I pulled it off, thinking it was actually not a tick. If I'd known it was a tick, I wouldn't have pulled it off. I thought it was a bit of dirt, and then scratched it, and it came off. And then I was like, "Oh, that's a tick." And I looked at it, and it was, you got to make sure you get the whole thing, and it's a problem if you don't, and whatever else. And then you check if it's engorged, and it was neither engorged, and I managed to get the whole thing. So that's pretty good prognosis. And then there was no secondary consequences, like no infection or anything like that. Cleaned it and did all the things you're meant to do. So yeah, like
I'm
relatively
glad. Oh
comfortable.
man, I'm
Yeah,
so glad you're here with us today. Oh, I'm grateful.
calm down, pal. Like if you actually look into the potential consequences, that can be pretty bad, man. I don't know if you've heard of alpha gal syndrome, but basically you become allergic to meat, so you can't eat meat.
Oh,
Um,
that would be awful. That would be
yeah,
worst
so
case
that's
scenario for me.
or Lyme disease is another one, mate. So yeah, there's actual serious consequences to a tick bite that again, not a part of South African life, so not really something you guys know about. But yeah, big problems certainly in the States and then parts of Europe as well.
Yeah, we do get tick bite fever, and we do have a lot of ticks on our property. I live on a small farm, and we do get ticks, and we have to treat the dogs, prepare them for it, etc. I do find ticks on me from time to time, but yeah, luckily nothing too untoward. I was at
What
the
about you?
bio on Friday. Sorry.
I was gonna say, what about you, mate? What have you been doing?
I was at the bio on Friday. She's very happy with my progress, and she was putting me through the paces. The hardest workout I have done in over 6 months. I was actually sweating. Towards the end of it, my watch actually buzzed and said, "You are having a very stressful day," because I didn't have it on a workout or anything. I forgot to start a workout on. And it says, "You are having a very stressful day. Please make time to relax." And she had a very good chuckle because it was very accurate. By that point, I could barely breathe. But it was really good to see that she had that kind of confidence in my body and was really putting me through the ringer. Don't think I've recovered yet because I probably haven't eaten appropriately because I'm not used to recovering anymore, focusing on recovery. So I've been exhausted. But also went to the physio this morning and super happy with the progress. We are approaching 5 months post L5S1 spinal fusion for me. And yeah, getting there. Very happy with the
Nice.
progress.
I'll never forget crewing somebody. I crewed someone for a 100 miler, and he finished the 100 miler and sat down and was sitting there just like, because he'd finished he finished at like 8 a.m. or something, and it was a beautiful day. So he was sort of sitting out there watching other people finish and relaxing, and his family came and he'd gone for 28 hours or something or whatever overnight. So it'd been a big one. Anyway, and he's sitting down, and he sat for probably, I don't know, half hour, 45 minutes, maybe an hour, and his Garmin beeps at him to get moving because he'd been sitting down for too long. And I was like, that is the most inappropriate notification of all time.
Oh, that would be annoying. Right. We are supported by Stride running power meters on this podcast. Our VP of Data, Emmanuel Katsan, has posted some impressive data in our Strava group, which you can actually also follow. We are on there under 1% better, all written out words. What was he posting over there?
So it's actually a little while ago, but we kept it. I mean, it's really good stuff. But basically, it was 9 months of what he's calling Norwegian training. I'm not sure. I think it's Norwegian singles he's using as opposed to Norwegian double threshold type of stuff. But anyway, he basically said he's been running for 45 years, tore his meniscus in 2023, and somehow in the last 9 months he's had the best stretch he's had in 5 years, and just showed his gap pace coming down, his power going up, and his heart rate sort of for those efforts staying stable, which is a good sign that he's improving, right, as a thing. But the thing to me that really stood out from this is like the consistency and how important consistency is to improving it, right? Like he's had a 9 month good patch. So it doesn't surprise me he's got good results as a result of that. But you can see his LT2 pace, which is mirroring, which is basically mirrored by his critical pace in stride, is improving. So, and research would back this up, doing it, particularly if you're training in a method that's sustainable. Like we get really hung up on above threshold, below threshold, where are we training? But like ultimately, those are really small details, and the really big detail that you need to make sure is, I guess, optimized for is consistency. Like you need to be able to back this up week on week on week, on month on month on month. I mean, if you look at my training at the moment, I'm guaranteeing you all these things are improving, but via very little specific work from me. It's just consistency because I can't tolerate the load at this stage. So the other thing you'll note in his data, and I've got it in the document for you there, mate, there's small variances. Like it sort of goes up and down a little bit. Broadly, they're asymptotic, which is like the pace is the pace is coming down and the wattage is going up, both asymptotically. But there is some little variation, and that probably reflects day-to-day variation, which is to say on some days your threshold will be slightly different based on any number of factors, including sleep and recovery and hydration and caffeine and whatever, right? Which speaks to the value of something like Stride, where you can track these things over time and they will modify slightly, as opposed to a lab test where you get it once and you might go 3-4 times a year, but that stuff changes as we get fitter and less fit and more and less ready or prepared. So I do think there's a lot of value in the wearables in general, and certainly in this respect. I was actually doing some research for a presentation I'm giving tomorrow at a conference, and looking at the history of GPS watches and looking at the first one that came out. So they came out in 2003. So they're 23 years old now. The very first Garmin Forerunner GPS watch came out then. So it's interesting to think there's a group of runners who don't know running without a watch. Whereas when I started running, I had no idea of a watch. I remember leaving a stopwatch on the fence and doing my 5K loop, which could be 5Ks, could be more, could be less, no idea. But I used to remember leaving on the fence and like starting it and then like running and doing my thing and like finishing up and like grabbing at the watch to stop it to check my time.
How old are you, man? Wow. But it's actually not that long ago. 22, 23 years for GPS. We are living in a time of AI. We are living in a time of extreme technology advancement. Like it's not that long ago. Hey, 22, 23 years old. Like you say, we
Well,
grew up, I'm older than you. We grew up, without those things.
I'm sure you're familiar with Moore's law, which is like the exponential speed of development of technology. So like technology development is exponential. So things get quicker. So it makes sense.
Yeah. Check out Stride if you would like to have a running power meter like David and I. We are users of it. We have a link in the show notes down below that relates directly to us and helps us, lets them know it does come directly from us. Some community shout outs. Let's have a look at see what you have been up to. Andreas Vegan one said to us, Begimus. I hope that's how you say it. I'm pretty sure I got something wrong in there. He won the 10K in 34:50. Also, Sondre Godsmoon was third at the. Are these real names, or are you trying to catch me out here? Third at
No,
the
they're
whatever. You did 10K in some race in 35 minutes and 10 10 seconds.
Well, so the first one I believe is Lithuanian. The second one I believe is Norwegian. So yeah.
Apologies, I really need to become au fait with naming in those races. And then also Magnus Dalsgaard went 8:31 at Ironman Hamburg, third in his age group, sixth man, and 14th overall age group. His marathon was 2:56, sub 3. Very, very impressive, Magnus.
I think 14th overall is not age group. I think that's overall, including the pro females.
Really?
Yeah, so he did
Very
8:30.
likely.
He did 8.
8:31, very likely.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and he
Wow.
get third in his age group already. You did read that bit, and then he got sixth
Yeah, yeah,
man. So
yeah,
I'm assuming he was beaten then by default. You would assume he's beaten by 8 women, which would make sense given the speed of those women. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that would make sense. Anyway, Brett Goldfinch went 147 at the Quitpo 24K. So this is where Nitta does a bunch of his running. It's one of Nitta's favorite running areas. It's a trail race there. So congratulations. Olivia Crozier, former colleague of ours. Well, briefly, she left just as you were starting. But anyway, she ran a great a half marathon PB over a hilly course. She ran 143. And then the Hawkins crew. So Matt and his better half, and I use the term intentionally. So he ran a big PB in the Brisbane Half Marathon. He went 128, and his wife Sani ran a 10K PB and a half marathon PB. That's not how we do things, but to be fair, her previous 10K PB was from a half marathon. So she ran 141 at the Brisbane Half as well. So they're both training up for a marathon upcoming. So that's exciting. And then Josh Rockenkamp ran 450 at the Brisbane Marathon in a controlled effort, which I believe was just like a Sunday long run for him. So congratulations, Josh.
And then previous guest on the podcast, Peter Engdahl, got second at the uphill and third at the up and down at the European Trail Championships. You love your Spotify polls. What's our latest poll results?
So again, they're always 2 weeks behind or 2 weeks delayed because that's how long I leave them open for. But it's interesting looking at the Emily Dow episode responses. So I sort of said, what have you changed as a result of listening to this episode? So was it, more lifting, more fiber, more vinegar, more carbs, or all of the above? And 33% said more fiber, which is great, and 66% said all of the above, which is a bit more of everything. So I think that's great. I'll pass it on to Emily, and we love to give feedback to guests. So, and that's something they appreciate. Every guest, without fail, is surprised to hear feedback from us, and very thankful for it. So these sort of things help us.
Yeah, that episode's doing super well. So check it out if you haven't done so yet, Dr. Emily Dow. We did get a comment in on Spotify, which says, so I love the modern pentathlon and was really sad to see show jumping go, as it's just pretty funny. I told my wife the update. She's non-horsey, but when I introduced her to the modern pentathlon, she agreed removing show jumping was sad. I told her the latest update and she suggested maybe adding hobby horses too would be a good add. At what point is this sport going to be a mockery of the Olympics? That came in from Wilts 13.
It's a good thought of like, I think about this a lot, particularly with respect to the Winter Olympics and adding sports like breakdancing or skateboarding or, Winter Games lend themselves a bit more to extreme sports, but that's certainly coming to the Summer Games as well. The question is like, what is the Olympic Games? What do we think it is? And again, I sort of said this a couple of weeks back, or we have recently in different ways, but I think when most people think of the Olympics, certainly in our generation, they will be thinking of things like swimming and track and field. And then maybe the other sports that you tend to watch because they're on that you'd never normally watch. Maybe Melbourne Pentathlon is for that for Will. So it is a hard question to answer, but my bias has always been if it ain't the pinnacle of the sport, get it out. So football goes, basketball goes, etc. I certainly think that, and there might be some sports, and I'm not averse to this, where we have perhaps women's sports and not men's sports, but like it might be the pinnacle for say women's basketball, but not men's basketball, and so like men don't play. Like I don't have an issue with that. Other
For
people
me,
might, and you
football
might
as
come.
well. I think there's value for women's football in the Olympics. For the men's, for men, not so much. The sport is already developed on that side. We need to see more of it on the women's side, and the Olympics is a great platform for that in terms of eyeballs.
Well, I mean, the rules are different, right? You can play a full pro team in the women's, and you can only play like 2 or 3 pros and then a bunch of under 23s in the men's. So that speaks to like it's a bit of a mockery as it is. So, that's probably the thing. So to Will's question, like of like when does it become a mockery? Like it depends on who you are. I think sometimes as well, it's easy for us to pass judgment from our perspective, but maybe the younger generations enjoy it, and maybe they want to see it. And if this gets eyeballs and it gets a younger generation involved, who are we to say it's wrong? Right.
Mm.
So the Olympics should be for everybody. It's got to inspire. If you look at its more altruistic values and less commercial ones, it's about inspiring the next generation to be active to some degree and like aspire to things. So if you can catch the TikTok generation via TikTok or something like that, then I think we have to kind of be okay with that, as much as we may dislike it ourselves.
Yeah, we just become old complaining men in our day, etc., etc. It definitely has to evolve with the times and be relevant for as many people as possible. We also got a question in on Spotify from me, Jim. I hope that's how you say it. Says, great episode. Would love to know your thoughts on how athletes should approach carb periodization. What do you think of tracking apps like Fuelin and Glycogo? Do you have any input on that?
Yeah. Well, this was with respect to the carbohydrates episode with Ator. Now, I haven't spoken to Ator about this, but I can certainly answer the question. If you look at the research, it's pretty supportive of carbohydrate periodization, which, for those not familiar, basically you bump carbs up in and around hard workouts and more carbohydrate usage, and then bump them down on days where you're using less carbs. Maybe easy activity or gym session where you may need less carbs. So it's basically like matching your carbohydrate intake to your carbohydrate needs, right? And this is a pretty well established protocol. How low you go is a point of debate, but it's certainly something that happens. It happens in elite sport a lot because you just have to match those requirements. So, interestingly, a recent paper from Jeffrey Rothschild from New Zealand, he showed that athletes don't do this well at all. And that paper's like the last couple of weeks. So I didn't want to go through the whole paper, but you can certainly find it. This doesn't surprise me because I think, and this may be where you need to use an app, like people don't really understand how much carbohydrate they're intaking and how much they need. So I think that's part of where the value may be for these apps, be it short-term or long-term use, right? You might decide you want to do this long-term. You might decide, listen, I'm going to do this for 6 months to learn what I need to take in on a day, and learn what a high carb day looks like and a low carb day. I think this is best displayed to me when people talk about carb loading and go for a pasta dinner. Like, that isn't carb loading. Carb loading's very intentional with a lot of carbohydrate. It's about 10 grams per kilo of body weight, or that ends up being about 5 grams of carbs per pound. That's so much carbohydrate. It's insane. Like, it really is. Like, to give people insight, for the Boston Marathon, I tracked everything and wrote it all down, wrote an article on it for the company we used to work for. But I never forget eating a whole kilogram of pasta for lunch, which is
I
2.2
remember that.
pounds of pasta,
Yeah.
which is that was just lunch. So that's more than most people would eat, for their carb loading dinner. So Anyway, the point is, apps. I think there are tools, and all tools can be used and can be helpful, but then none of them are necessary and none of them are perfect. They're just one way of achieving it. I do think getting an idea of quantities is helpful for people, but there is a very important personality type thing here to be wary of. So, like, know yourself and know the risks of tracking things and whether it's going to help you. So there are some people where it will be triggering. There are some people who would be helpful. For someone like me, despite the fact that I love tech and data and apps, like, that becomes a bit much for me because I am pretty obsessive. I will track everything. It becomes a bit much. What you find, certainly, and I've done bits of this, when you are tracking everything you eat, you start to question whether you should be eating that because you're like, oh, I don't want to track it. Right? Especially if you're weighing food, you're like, do I want to do this? So I remember the dietitians I went through university with, they had to track everything and weigh it with scales, everything they ate for a period of time. And they're like, I just stopped eating I'd skip bits because I'd be hungry, but I couldn't be bothered weighing it. And, that's a dangerous place to get to. So certainly the apps are helpful. Directionally, I think they're good. Remembering that calories are really hard to track. Like, it's really hard to get a good idea of calories, and because we don't have gas exchanges, so it's a pretty rough science in that respect. Certainly, grams of carbohydrates and intake is important, but we don't really know what you burn unless we're tracking it, and that's carbohydrates or anything else. So it's not to say these are wrong, but they're probably directionally correct, and then you have to tweak around them a little bit.
Again, let us know what you think. Do you use a tracking app? Would love your input. You can comment if you're listening on Spotify. You can DM us on 1% Better Pod on Instagram. You can email us. We do have an email in the show notes down below. We heard last week from a listener, Claire Petzel, who said she's a calcaneus fracture survivor, and they thought that she was a dancer or ballerina when they checked out. We didn't quite understand what she meant by that. And we said, Claire, if you're listening, reach out, explain to us. Well, she has done so. I almost didn't read out this comment when I found out she was an Arsenal supporter. So she's very, very lucky to get a mention on this podcast again. But this is what she said. It's Claire Petzl with the Calcaneus. Firstly, massive fan of the pod, long time listener. The reason I said they thought I was a dancer slash ballerina or builder wasn't to do with the shape of my foot, but more their questioning of how I got injured. Example, how did you do that? It's really hard for a runner to do given it needs quite a lot of load slash force. Usually we see it in ballet dancers who land badly on heels or builders who fall off ladders onto their heels, which is what made them investigate. And she says, shout out to her Dr. John at Fortuous as they figured something else was going on. Hence, coalition. Is it coalition? The coalition was discovered.
Yep.
She says, so it's fascinating and thanks for talking about the different types. I'd never heard of it before, and I think I had the first one you mentioned, fibrous, but not entirely sure. There wasn't much they could do or recommend as I was functioning well with it. They told me to avoid red S and use insoles and do the regular rehab. Thanks.
So how did you find out she was an Arsenal supporter, mate?
She was DMing me on Instagram, so I saw on her Instagram profile. She messaged us on Instagram.
Okay, just creeping. Okay. I think that last little bit of that,
Wow.
I just think the last little bit of that was actually a question. Is like basically, is there anything else to do? And I think if that is a question, and she's functioning well, then I think there's not much to do. But if there is anything to do, it's really about the limitations. So basically, do what you need to do to keep moving, and certainly keep movement in the joints of the foot that aren't, that don't have the coalition. So generally, when you have a joint that's blocked for whatever reason, coalition or other, right, tight ankle joint or something like this, arthritis, etc., what you find is that the joints above and below have to compensate. So you do need to make sure that they're strong enough and keeping moving. So I would say to Claire, you need to make sure that that's one of the things. And then insoles, if they're helping, certainly. Otherwise, if you're functioning well, then that's great. And everyone should avoid red S. That's not a coalition thing. That's an everybody thing.
Right. We are supported by Nomio. We welcomed them onto the podcast last week. Why is Nomio good for me, David? What are the benefits?
Well, so there's health benefits that I certainly, again, wrote about in my newsletter that people could go listen to, or go read even, that are around a lot of things with to do with sulforaphane, so like brain health benefits and some anti-cancer type stuff that Nomio don't want to talk about and don't necessarily talk about themselves because they're more in the performance realm. When it comes to performance, they've got a couple of papers that that are available on their website that again are in that newsletter of mine in the references. The articles at this stage or the research at this stage, firstly, is done by some of the researchers involved, and they were doing that prior to sort of being involved with the company or launching the company. So the researchers launched the company and then employed people. So there is a little bit of bias there to be weary of, but the science does look pretty good. It is very early in the stages at this in terms of what's showing. So at this stage, the one paper suggests that there's lower lactate levels for the same output, so a reduction in internal load with the same output. Now, again, you win no medals for lactate levels, right? But the question is, does that allow you to sustain better training or do more training or to get more work done, reduce the stress of the same training? So that's one interesting thought there, perhaps changing the fuel substrate used. And again, that would change stress levels to some degree. The other study was probably more interesting. It looked at overreaching and basically gave people 7 days of high intensity intervals. So like a relatively easy way to overreach people. And it's always hard to do these things in a way that's both ecologically valid. So like what would happen in the real world where no athlete would do 7 days of intervals. Well, I mean, there's a couple guys that used to do it, but
No
these
one
days no one
should.
would do that. Yeah. So then you're trying to balance like how easy it is to get the research done and show something that's interesting versus how ecologically valid it is. So they looked at this. It is overload via high intensity intervals daily, basically. And what they found is that there was, when using Nomio daily, there was a reduction in nocturnal hypoglycemia, so low glucose overnight. And that can be important because it can wake you up from sleep and a bunch of other things like that. So it would be helpful to not have that. And again, this would fit for a different. This picture fits using a different fuel, right? Because if you're using more fat and less carbohydrates, you're going to have burn through less glycogen and therefore end up with less hypoglycemia. They also had less muscle soreness, and less symptoms of overtraining or overreaching at the stage. So it looks like perhaps there is a like a hormetic effect of this, and that would again fit these compounds are often mild toxins for protecting the plants, which then give us a benefit of activating pathways that help us to be more resilient. It's a phenomenon called hormesis, similar to like ice exposure, like cold baths and that sort of stuff. Exercise itself is a hormetic stressor. So it's an interesting field of research. I know I was speaking to the guys the other day. They've got a bunch of research or there's a bunch of research being done that is going to be published relatively soon, and we'll keep talking about that on the podcast. But it's certainly, yeah, certainly promising. Again, as I said on the episode with Ator through the week or in the prep for that, like there's a lot of smoke here. I've got a good feeling there's a bunch of fire, which is why I was willing to sort of proceed. But time will tell.
Check out Nomeo if you are intrigued. We do have a direct link in the show notes down below. We would really appreciate that. I'm very intrigued for listeners to start using it and we see what results we get, and we'd love your feedback. Hot off the press, we just got a comment on Spotify on last week's episode, Should Olympians Get Paid? You might have heard my new puppy Willow barking earlier. We literally just got this comment in now while recording. David hasn't even seen it yet. From Nick Economides, who says, Xylon, my man, you almost gave me a heart attack. When the puppy cried out the first time, I genuinely thought I'd run over a dog for a second.
Oh no, mate.
Shame. Towards the end of last week's episode, Willow started making some noises. Sorry about that. But let's move on. What's come across my desk this week? Some quick bits for you. New CBA for the WNBA was just announced. Why does this interest you? You were mentioning this on a call to me earlier in the week, actually.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like, so the CBA is a collective bargaining agreement. It's basically how we get paid, right? And I think Caitlin Clark is a huge driver of eyeballs to the league. And we've talked about Caitlin Clark extensively on the podcast before. Very good player. When she plays, they have to move stadiums. It's very clear the Caitlin Clark effect is real. But regardless of why, there are more eyeballs on the WNBA now, and therefore they've just re-signed a new media deal. Or they've just signed a new media deal, which is a significant uptick in their media deal. And as a result, you end up with a new collective bargaining agreement. So they actually got a temporary one off the ground to get the season started, but this is now the final bit where they've sort of, got it locked in for this TV rights deal. Now, what I found to be most interesting about this is a veteran recognition payment, right? And so it's going to be paid to retired players with at least 5 years of WNBA experience. And that's going to total in excess of $14 million and will be paid out to about 280 players. So basically the way this works is, So the breakdown, it's going to be a single payment, and the breakdown is based on the years played. So if you played 5 to 7 years, you get $30,000. If you played 8 to 11 years, you get $50,000. And if you played 12 years plus, you get $100,000.
This is amazing because it's basically like retroactive payment for the role you played in building up the league when it wasn't generating these revenues.
Exactly, which I think is great. I think it's amazing. And then there's an interesting clause in here and this is just added. So any retired player who won the MVP award, which is obviously the best player in the league, but played less than 12 years will qualify for the $100,000 bonus anyway. And that applies to 5 players. Now, I'm not going to read them out. As much as I'm a fan of women's sports and support them in that, I've never heard of these people. I strongly doubt our listeners are going to have heard of them. You can Google this and find their names, but it's great that they're getting that payment. And interestingly, when the WNBA started in 1997, only the highest paid players earned $50,000 annually. Under this new CBA, the minimum salary has increased from less than $70,000, which is the recent CBA, not 1997, to $270,000. Whilst the max salaries were up from about $250,000 to $1.4 million. So this is like a big chunk. It's a magnitude more, particularly at the bottom end.
I love the evolution of sport, man. I have big debates with friends who, some of them aren't into women's sport. Some of them are definitely into women's sport and see the value. And this just shows that no matter the dinosaurs, the stragglers, like the sport is evolving. And I love, ultimately, it's if the commercial ventures, then people are willing to pay for it, it shows that it is sustainable and there's value in it. So love that update. Thank you. Should we talk about some UCI regulations that have been published last week? The UCI is the governing body for cycling. And it seems like we often bash them on this podcast, but one of the regulations that they've just updated, David actually agrees with him. The ban of front pockets that'll come into effect from the 1st of July this year. Why do you think that's a good idea?
Well, if we're worried about safety, like an aero fairing, which is effectively what this is, right? Any sort of aero fairing, any improvement in aerodynamics is a way to get free speed. You push the same
Mm,
watts, your aerodynamics are better, you go faster. If we're worried about speed and we're worried about crashes, let's not change gear ratios. Let's prevent this sort of garbage. Now, it's innovation, it's cool, or it's whatever, but like, we don't need it. This is
mm,
solely with the view of, can I get faster for free? And it's like, if we do the same to everybody and say none of this, then it's an even playing field, and we're preventing some of the excessive speed, and we end up, preventing that. Now, that's you've got to be careful because you don't want to um, stifle innovation, but this isn't like something that's going to trickle down. This isn't a company who's created a beautiful new thing. It's like this is them trying to steal stuff in an aero tunnel where they're like, "Oh, let's throw a bladder down my front." It's like, come on, guys, like we don't need to do
mm.
this. So, I don't. I think you can get away without this. I don't think it adds a lot. I don't think there's a potential downside to it from a speed perspective and a risk. So it's also largely only for time trials. Like this isn't gonna like slow down the peloton much. It's really just about time trials. So like, yeah, it's fine.
It's interesting to see that this is catching on now because I remember Frank Schleck, who retired many, many years ago, doing this. I think it was in a time trial, and I don't know, maybe people were practicing it, but it wasn't very visible. But it's interesting that this a lot of people have gotten onto it now that the UCI has decided it's a no go. One of the
But
other updates.
it one well, hang on a second. But one of the things to remember here is the part of the reason the UCI doesn't want it is because of aesthetics, and that's probably part of the
Mm,
reason it was never picked up because it looks silly. And
yeah,
even if it works, it'll look silly. It's like the granny free throw. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but you underarm the free throw. It's actually a
yeah,
much more accurate way to shoot, but no one
exactly.
really does it because you get ridiculed for it. So yeah, I promise you that's what's happening. As to why it wasn't picked up more consistently.
Well, the sport's becoming more competitive, so people are looking for those 1% betters, and this was probably one of them that someone's picked up.
Yeah. And that in itself is a cool thing to do now. So it doesn't matter how you do it now. So just like, oh, you look like an idiot. But Visma helmets, like one of our, I think it's the second episode, we talked to Robbie Ketchell about aero helmets and the helmets from Visma, which are ridiculous.
Yeah,
And it's
from
like,
Jiro.
that's cool because it's innovation and you're trying to get faster. And it's like, okay, so it doesn't matter that you look silly because you're trying to get faster. Therefore, it's cool.
Well, they're one of the culprits of this. They are slightly lagging behind in budgets behind the Ineoses and the especially UAEs. And I think while they're trying to raise more money, they're obviously looking at innovative ways to save on watts. One of the other updates from the UCI are the use of head unit sizes. They've put a restriction on the onboard computer size based on the largest products currently on the market, which I think is the Wow Element Ace. The new maximum dimensions are 126 by 71 millimeters, which will be imposed from the 1st of January 2028. This was on Escape Collective that published this. And the reason given essentially is that they are looking after riders' mental bandwidth. They don't want riders to be looking down at the computers from a safety point of view for too long. I know you have opinions on this.
So I actually think the regulation, which is this is the maximum size we have now, we're not going bigger. Like I think that's a reasonable thing to do, and it's not a bad way to go about it. It's kind of what happened with the shoes with
Yeah,
Nike. It was like, all right, this is the maximum height we have at the moment. Let's just not go above that,
there
right?
are
So let's try
boundaries.
and
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and like we kind of can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. This is where we're at the moment. Let's not go beyond it, right? But one thing that annoys me as an Australian, and I won't say the proper phrase, but I'll use a PC version of it, is like, don't pee on my boots and tell me it's raining. Don't tell me this is a mental bandwidth thing. It isn't a mental bandwidth thing because if you make it smaller, they're going to have the same data fields. They're going to be fiddling with it more. They're going to have less time with their hand on the handlebars because they're going to be pushing buttons to get to the next screen so they can see it. And if it's smaller, they're going to squint harder and look at it for longer. Believe me, anybody who's had an issue with the sunlight in their watch or something like this will agree. This is not going to change anything. And the yeah, I just yeah, they will use what they're comfortable with. They're going to always have the race route on it. They're always going to have their power. They're always going to have heart rate. The ones that are using things like time wear are going to have their breathing rate. So like you're going to have these things. You're going to have distance. You're going to have all those things. So it's not going to change. Doesn't matter how big or small it is. They're going to have the same data fields that they're comfortable with. They're professionals. Have been doing this for decades.
Yeah, this was published on Escape Collective, the cycling website, as I mentioned. And one of the comments on the article actually said they should limit the data fields to 3 or something. Then you only have something quick to look at instead of just the size of something. So let's keep an eye on this. As I say, I agree with you too. It's good that there is a size limit, but yeah, the reasoning might leave
That's also
some
just
questioning.
quietly. That's also quite big. Like if you actually read that, 126 by 71, that's 12. That's
It's
uh,
millimeters.
yeah, that's 7 centimeters by 12 centimeters. Like that's quite big.
Yeah. I mean, I think
That's
it's fine, but we can't have an
it's
iPad on there. And we can't have, also
well,
aesthetically, you can't have an iPad on the front of your computer, on your bicycle.
I would say it's. I would guess it's probably something like 3/4 of the size of a mobile phone, of an iPhone. So
Yeah.
like that's pretty
Yeah.
big. So let's not. They're not squinting.
Yeah. Another cycling update was a discussion that's been going on is a salary cap. So, in a recent appearance on EF Cycling's performance podcast, the team manager Jonathan Voigt has made the case that a salary cap could reinvigorate a sport that has entered an era of unprecedented dominance by a tiny handful of riders. Again, I grabbed this from Escape Collective. I know there's somewhat of a salary cap, especially in American sports, but yeah, like what's your take on this? You and I have talked about this offline before.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, this isn't a discussion. This is an idea from Vorders. I wish this was a
Mm.
discussion because that'd be interesting.
Yeah,
Um, but it's it's perceived as him sort of complaining because he doesn't have the money. I don't think that's fair. I think it's you can level whatever criticism you want at him, but I think this is actually not a bad idea to try and level the
it's a
playing field. Now we've
valid
talked
question.
a lot of time. Yeah, there's been a lot of talk in this podcast at different times about methods to create equality in leagues or balance in leagues. So one method is a draft. Now the problem with drafts is that then outsources development to other people, right? And at the moment, the development comes from the teams. So the teams have development teams and they develop the riders. And you kind of want to reinforce that and reward that to some degree. So you wouldn't want to draft. And if you did have a draft from it, you'd have to like do all sorts of things around, oh, if you've developed a rider, it's different, right? So it's just not going to work a draft. So then you get to a salary cap. There are different types of caps. So the NBA has what they call a soft cap, which is like this is the amount you're allowed to spend. If you spend more, you have to pay a luxury tax. Now, if you do that, you end up in the same problem we have now, which is the rich teams will do that and the other teams won't, right?
What
So
is
that's
a
just how that's
luxury
going to go.
tax?
This is you.
Who
It's
does
just
that go
tax
to?
on the league, or I don't know. I assume the league gets the money.
Okay.
Maybe to the other teams. I don't know. I assume it's a league though, but basically,
I
it's just
think
a
it
way of
gets, does it not get distributed to the other teams then? I think I read something like that. Or is that the NFL?
could be.
Yeah,
That'd be
I
the
think that's
NBA,
what it
not
is.
the NFL. Yeah, which is
Okay.
fine. Like it gets distributed to the other teams, but like that is a drop in the ocean, right? Like you're talking about they might be paying, a million or two to each team, which is a lot of money. But at the same time, like when you look at what a basketball player earns, that ain't much,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so you pay the luxury tax, and again, the rich owners or the teams that have a lot of money can afford this, and they do it, and the ones that don't. End of story, right? So, and that's the whole mechanism you're trying to avoid is like the rich people or the rich teams can do what they want to, and the others can't, right? Which is currently the situation and currently the problem. In the NFL, you have a hard cap, but there's a lot of salary cap gymnastics. So you can do things like convert salary into a signing bonus, and that signing bonus is amorted out over the length of the contract, and you create all these voidable years at the end of a contract. So you end up paying this person, 5 years after they've stopped playing as a way of reducing the salary cap load or the amount of salary that's on your cap at the moment. So, yeah, if you do that and allow that, you end up with the same problem because to do that, you have to be able to pay that money up front because that money in the signing bonus goes to escrow or is paid to the player at that time. So the more money you have, the more you can do this, the more salary cap gymnastics you can play. So the wealthy teams and the wealthy owners can do that. So again, UAE would dominate in that context. So, yeah, I'm not sure if there's I'm not sure how best to do this. I think probably a hard cap without the salary cap gymnastics is important. Um, but it's also like this sort of thing would encourage people to develop their own talent because it's generally cheaper, right, to develop your own talent than acquire talent in a salary capped league. So because you generally pay a premium to get someone to leave, so
It'll
you're
also
better off developing your own.
It also favors certain people because developing talent is a skill that not everyone has, and I love it. It's like a pure skill, and you should be rewarded for it. I always enjoy Jonathan Borges' thoughts, and the reason why he's saying this is because the sport might be more interesting if you see Tadej Pogacar, multiple Tour de France winner, absolute dominant of the sport, the biggest talent undoubtedly in the sport right now. If he was on a weaker team, on a smaller team, right now, his team has got the biggest budget. So all of the guys working for him in their own right could be leaders on other teams. So they are so strong that they just control the race until he does what he does and off he goes and he wins. And that becomes that foregone conclusion. It does not make for good viewership. We've discussed this multiple times on this podcast. So he's saying, put a salary cap on so someone like him gets less support around him. So then we see how the best rider in the world fares. And that would certainly be interesting. We're seeing a bit of it in the Dauphiné right now. It used to be called the Criterium de Dauphiné since I was born. It's got a new sponsored name now, which I do not, my French is not great. So cycling fans will know what I'm talking about, the Dauphiné. There are the next tier best riders after Jonas Vingegaard and Tadej Pogacar are racing there at the moment, but the teams are struggling to control. So stage one and stage two were won by riders you did not expect to win. They were won by breakaway. Whereas if Tadej was there with his full complement of team, that would not happen. They would just control and like the race would come down to the favorites. And stage one and two actually made for more interesting racing, and I'm all for it. I would love to see more of that in the sport.
So what you're talking about is distribution of talent rather than concentration of talent, right? So the alternative is the all-star game or the all-star match where you concentrate talent, you see all the best guys go together, right? So then you would say, let's get the best climbers. So let's go Jonas versus Tadej, but then let's get them, let's distribute, like, let's let them choose a team, right? And then let's go have a race and then see what happens there, right? So that's kind of the all-star method there.
Interesting. Okay, let's move on to another interesting topic: ultramarathons and bowel cancer. Is there a link? Running and other forms of exercise are known to reduce the risk of developing colon and other cancers. But running ultras or multiple yearly marathons represent a different magnitude of exercise. So, a small study found a surprisingly high incidence of precancerous polyps in young extreme runners, sparking controversy and concern. This was from an article by the Washington Post, and thanks to longtime listener Mark Morris sending this into us. You were aware of this research, right?
Yeah, I sort of read this. I'm probably less concerned about this than many, not because it's not a big deal, but because it's just hard to understand, and you don't want to jump at shadows. You get, maybe if you've been around long enough, you see this stuff come and go a little bit, particularly when you look at this. So basically, what happened was the researcher and his colleagues had noticed a couple of cases. So this often happens, right? Is when we don't know what something is. So the best example of this is as AIDS, the AIDS epidemic, or the best, or a good example of this is the AIDS epidemic in San Francisco, right? So a bunch of young, fit, healthy men are coming in with really strange diseases that they shouldn't be getting, right? And you're like, well, hang on, why is this happening? And they're in a certain area. You're like, well, there's something different about this group of people. And it turned out to be men who were having sex with men. And therefore, it was what we now know is to be AIDS, right? Not just HIV, AIDS. So full-blown acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, which means that they got all these strange diseases. So now we start to understand it, right? We backfill that. So this person, in this case, this doctor, gastroenterologist, was noticing that he was seeing polyps in young people, right? Now, traditionally, polyps don't happen in young people. They happen. They start happening as we age more, right? And you start to see them in older people, which is why if you look at bowel cancer screenings all over the world, they generally start in the sort of 40s to 50s, depending on your risk category, right? If you've had a family history, it starts a little bit earlier. If not, you start at 50. And there's different ways of doing this, but one of the ways that's often done, especially if we suspect you have polyps, is a colonoscopy, right? So we put a camera up the back passage, we have a look, right? So, and then we rip the polyps off. Now, polyps themselves are considered to be precancerous. So they are not cancer, they are precancer, but they go on to develop into cancer. Once you have polyps, you get increased screening and all sorts of stuff. Again, remember, this is not medical advice. This is me explaining a study to you. So anyway, they recruited. So as a result of observing this, they said, okay, let's recruit a bunch of people and have a look here. And so they recruited 94 extreme runners. Now, listeners of this podcast probably don't think these people are extreme, but I promise you, on a population level, the listeners of this podcast are probably extreme themselves, let alone these runners. So
It's a good
each of
sample
these,
size, 94, I'd say.
not for something like this. It's you need massive numbers in this context, and we'll talk about some of the other things that you need. But it's not bad. But they looked at these people were aged 35 to 50 and had completed at least 5 marathons or 2 ultramarathons in general in their life. Right, so they had not had a colonoscopy for 10 years, so this is important. Right, so these people basically had no reason to think that they had an increased risk of cancer, and there's certainly no reason to think they had polyps previously. All right, so they they had a colonoscopy, and the outcomes were apparently rather startling. Nearly half of the runners had polyps, and some of these again could develop into cancer, although many won't, and that's really important here. 50% of the runners had large advanced polyps, which are farther along the continuum towards cancer. But none of them had colon cancer. So the number, and especially the advanced types, was much higher than was typically seen during screening colonoscopies of adults in their late 40s. Right, so screening colonoscopies are what I was talking about is going to get screened for health. So historically, the incidence in that age group ranges from about 1.2 to 6%. Right, the reason for this is because of what they think is a mixture of like ischemia, so blood flow being diverted away from the gut because you're exercising, so there's less blood flow to the gut, as we sort of talked about with Emily Dow, and perhaps some leaky gut or some inflammation as a result. So what they probably need to do here, and I know they're doing another study, and again, I'm not an expert in statistics or research design, but what probably needs to happen here is what's called a cohort study. So because this is so small, what you probably need to do is look at a large cohort of people. So you would go probably look at Abbott World Marathon Major finishes is a good example. Everybody who's got a 6-star medal, let's get you all, right?
Okay.
Maybe
So we're
they're
talking
bad. Maybe,
thousands.
yeah, that might be a bad sample because they're probably wealthy people. Because if you can afford to go around the world, you're probably wealthy. And so therefore, that is a confounding variable. Or you might, I don't know, but you would look for, in a cohort study, you look for a group of exposed people, right? The exposure in this case of concern is ultramarathon or marathon, right?
Mm.
So you look for exposure and then you match them with people who haven't had that exposure. So same age, gender, whatever, and everything else as similar as possible. So you might do somebody, like the perfect would be all of their twins who don't run marathons, right? But have the same job or whatever. Like it's not going to happen. But that's kind of the example here. And you look at them and then look at the incidence in both those groups. Now you have these people had this, and these people who are identical but aren't that didn't have the running. Now let's look at the incidence rates here, and you would need a big study in that context. But I think it's really important to remember here, like exercise is healthy and prevents bowel cancer and helps bowel cancer recurrence. It's about how much exercise, right? So excessive exercise or extreme exercise isn't the same as normal exercise. And even if you are doing ultramarathons, you're worried, you're like, hey, I'm worried about bowel cancer. Like it may still be, your chances of dying are probably still reduced as a result of ultramarathoning, right? Maybe not as much if you exercised in moderation, but most people can't do that, right? So we live in the real world here. Most people do the thing they do and they find meaning from it and all those things. So it's probably still a net positive for you overall, whether it's for mental health and other risk factors and all that other stuff, right? So yes, the healthiest number of ultramarathons to complete in your life rounds up to 0. Probably the same for marathons, but that doesn't mean that you should do 0 in there. There's other reasons you would do that, right? So, yeah, it's your ultramarathoning might mean that you do less drinking and less smoking and more social activity and all those things, so that these things are all net benefits. So it's always hard to put something into a vacuum. So I would keep context here. I certainly, it's certainly worthwhile considering your risks in this respect and making sure you're drinking enough and eating appropriately, getting enough fiber, doing the other things you can do to limit your cancer risk at all times, particularly if you're running these things. But I wouldn't be jumping at shadows just yet. I'm certainly not concerned about my bowel cancer risk as a result of the study. Right, I will of course do all the appropriate screening things. And the one thing I'd say about colonoscopies is they're embarrassing for some people and certainly unpleasant, particularly the bowel prep you do in advance. You basically take a bunch of laxatives for a day and a bit, and it's pretty horrible. But the better you do that, the better the colonoscopy can be, and the better they can assess your risk and or limit these. So generally what happens to these adenomas or these polyps is they'll take them off. Right? They just get rid of them in there. And then you're they increase the screening and then they go from there. But the better your bowel prep, the better they can do that.
Yeah, I've had family members who've had that done to them. But thanks for that. Thanks for
No.
calming
It's
my...
not done to them. It's not done to them. They consent to it. Like, it is done for them.
I'm just meaning I've had family members who have had the polyps removed, so have seen that
Yeah,
process third
but
hand,
it's not.
second hand of it.
Yeah, but it's not done to them. They consented to that, and it's reasonable.
Okay. Do we have time to touch on the Diamond League? I was watching highlights last night from Rome and Stockholm. I didn't get to see the Rabat highlights, but you want to touch on a few things quickly?
So we talked about Rabat previously anyway. So yeah, let's touch on some stuff. I think there's some interesting stuff here. I don't know if you caught with Rome, but it was quite cool that the Italians were competing in uniforms that were not from their sponsors. They were from the police force or the army or something like this. I don't know if you caught this or if you
I
noticed this.
didn't catch it because I was looking out for it because you said look out for it, but in the highlights package I watched, none of the Italians did well. They didn't show them at all.
Well, three of them won, so they should have been there. But so what happens here is they're probably employed as public servants, and they
Mhm.
train full time and work in a sort of administrative roles or whatever. This happens a lot in the US. They become army reservists, and their
Mhm.
base is the Olympic Training Center. So this is actually a really smart way of doing it for countries, and it's all good for everybody involved until there's a war and you have to go, and it's a problem. So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That was quite interesting.
It's
I noticed.
common in Italy. Pro cyclist Elisa Longo Borghini, she's actually a registered policewoman. I mean, she's never had to really practice or anything, but she's supported by the police. And I think it's like you're saying, if there was an extreme case, you'd be called up for duty.
Yeah, and I mean, police is a bit different because she probably works minor administration. Would be probably the most extreme there. But if you're an army reservist, you kind of have to be ready to go to war.
Mm.
But anyway, so in the men's javelin, this was quite interesting. Ramesh Pathraj, he threw 92.62 to become eighth all time. He threw the
Wow.
heck out of this javelin. But and this is why I want to talk about this. He's an ex-cricket fast bowler. Apparently, he was clocked at 134 kilometers an hour as a teenager. Now, for the record,
Wow.
150 is considered is some of the fastest bowling of all time. Bowlers bowling, most of them, the fast guys are in and around the sort of high 130s to low 140s. So this guy, as
Mm.
a teenager, was bowling very quickly. But his dad was actually a thrower. So he threw javelin and stuff. And so this is a good example of like transfer of skills. If you think about fast bowling, you run up, you're side on, you're running fast, and you have to let go of a projectile. So this is very similar. And he's actually coached in Australia. So it's quite interesting to see this. And I think we'll see more of this coming out of India and Sri Lanka because there's a little bit of like talent identification. And if you can see it, you can be it because there's been an Indian thrower already and there's now a Sri Lankan thrower. And I think this will open a pathway for track and field for these young fast bowlers perhaps to transfer across for whatever reason if they're not doing so well with it. Or they find their throw better. So this, we talk about this a lot. You need to be able to see it to sort of understand there's a pathway for you. And the next thing I saw, I don't know if did you catch the women's 5K?
I'm not sure. Who was that? Who was that with?
I mean, a number of them. So it was an amazing finish. Amibor won it in 14:18, which is a world lead. So this was just a fast race. So Ayisa in fifth ran a season's best, and the rest of the runners from second to ninth ran PBs. So Yavi, the steeplechaser, was here. She ran a national record in there as well. And she's racing because there's no steeple at the Ultimate Championships, which is rough. So she's trying to get a 5K qualifier. But the reason this caught my eyes, Amebor is Ethiopian, but she's living in Spain and looking to get Spanish nationality, but can't. So she's now chasing another nationality. But as a result, the Ethiopians won't let her run for them. So she ran her 2:42 last kilometer. She's got the sixth. She's sixth all time on the 10K road, and it's got a 65-minute half, and basically can't run internationally outside of like these sort of Diamond League meets, which is like
Oh
kind of
wow.
sad for her.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm surprised that someone like Qatar or something like that hasn't come to try and sort of snap her up.
Yeah, maybe they will. There's still time. Did you want to talk about Keely Hodgkinson in the women's 400? By the way, the reason why I was looking distracted, if you watch the video, I was looking for a comment. Shout out to Matt Ely. Last week we said Keely Hodgkinson, open invitation for you to come on this podcast. He went on one of our Instagram posts and went and tagged us and said your presence is being requested on 1% Better Pod. So shout out to Matt.
That's awesome.
But this was a great race. Yeah, what went down?
Well, this is interesting. So Keely got a rough lane draw. So generally what happens is nowadays they're putting the best runners out wide and then like the worst runners on the inside. She was pretty she got a pretty inside lane draw, which means she's sort of it's a little bit hard for her. But I was a little bit disappointed with this. I think she probably was as well. She ran 51:14 for a PB, so she can't be too disappointed. But she ran a 24:1 split, so her halfway split there. And I thought she'd come kicking down off that a bit quicker, and just didn't quite look like it. She very much looked like she was in a different class to the other women. I mean, she was only 2 seconds behind the winner Jaeger from Norway, who was very impressive. But she sort of didn't ever look in it. But listen, she's still building into a season. She's done apparently a month block of 400 work, so you can't be disappointed with a PB. But yeah, it's crazy to think she looked out of place running a 51. So yeah, that was interesting. And then I found this to be interesting. The women's 200 meters, the race itself was like was what it was, but I caught some analysis afterwards that really piqued my interest, and I thought listeners might appreciate. So this is basically Julian Alfred versus Melissa Jefferson Wooden. So
Proper
Melissa
hit
Jefferson
out, a
Wooden,
proper race.
yeah. So Melissa Jefferson Wooden had a better start, but Alfred pulled away and then shut it down with the last 5 meters. She stumbled a bit, so I'm not sure if she tweaked a hamstring or if she just stumbled for whatever reason. I'm hoping she's okay. But Alfred ended up running 21:93 and Jefferson Wooden was 22:17. So not quite as their fastest, but pretty quick. But Stu McMillan was doing a bit of an analysis of their pacing, what he calls distribution, as opposed to pacing, because they probably don't pace it. It's more about the distribution of like effort, so to speak, in this, which is similar, but maybe for sprints rather than distance. So basically, the whole race was between 0.495 and 0.508. A lower ratio here means that the first half is a smaller proportion of the race, i.e., is faster. And historically, the elite mean is 0.51 to 0.516, right? So higher than this, which means the second half is faster, right? So most of the race were close to an even split. So they could generally go faster as the take home here. But he did make the point that sometimes firstly, a lot of people are going to respond to what's happening in front of them, right? So that's the first thing. But in terms of the top two here, sometimes what you do is you actually just send them out to see how they go. He said you just go hard from the gun and see what happens, right? And fade off a bit, and that's okay. So, yeah, it's quite interesting to think that even in the 200, distribution of effort is something that we should be worrying about and be interested by. And in this case, negatively split, which is interesting, given it's a sprint. So, yeah, that's I did catch that. And then the last observation from Rome. In the men's long jump, Tentoglu was there, the Greek guy, who's unbelievable. This guy's just been so dominant for a while. And he's a real competitor, and he often jumps to his best jump last, which is a sign of like very good competitive nature. But because of the way the Diamond League works, what happens is they do in everything except the vertical jumps, where you just have to clear heights when you get a certain number of attempts, so the throws and the horizontal jumps. You do 5, and then the top 3 get pulled away and they do a 6th jump, right? So it's kind of like the finalists. But they don't do that 3, 2, 1. They do that 1, 2, 3. The reason being they want the first person to jump. The person who's leading, they want them to jump, because what happens is if you do 3, 2, 1 in that context, they go, I'm still winning. I'm not going to do my last jump. So they want them to jump again so that the crowd get more people. But what it means is Tentoglu can't do his thing. So he jumps, but then Saraboyakov wins it on his last jump. So he went from 8:13 to 8:26. Right, so he jumped 13 centimeter further. This guy's actually a high jumper as well. He's a great high jumper, and he did 5 standing backflips to celebrate, which was cool to watch.
Wow.
But yeah, in a row. So it was cool to see that, and cool to see him jump. And he's obviously a very good jumper if he can do horizontals and verticals. But yeah, it was a bit sad to see Tentoglu not get his chance to respond.
And then Stockholm, I was watching this last night as well. Men's 400 meter, the South African Nene won it.
Yeah.
Didn't do so well in Rome, but seemed to be much better here.
Well, he ran the same exact time, 44.4. If you go look at his World Athletics, he just keeps running 44.4. It's hilarious. But
maybe he's trying to.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested. What caught my eye on this one was he was in lane 9. And usually what they do is they put the favorites a couple in from there. They put them in at like 6, 7. Because it's a less tight bend, although Stockholm's got a pretty tight bend as it is, because it's the old Olympic Stadium. But I'm wondering in lane 9, because you've got the stagger, right? So you're out the front, you can't see anybody. And I'm wondering if that's helpful for some of these guys, just from a pacing perspective, particularly the 400 meters, because there is a pacing aspect to it, that they just get to run their own race. Because that stagger doesn't unfold until the home straight. So you're generally going to be leading until at least that point. So you got 300 meters of your own sort of pacing, and then the last 100 meters is kind of like drop the hammer anyway. So I'm wondering if it was an advantage there. It's my only thought is like, I wonder how, sort of how much of an advantage this might be for some people, particularly if you're more inexperienced and you need to sort of run your own race.
It's worth looking at because the guy he beat him convincingly, I'd say, in Rome. So maybe it was more of an advantage to him. Yeah, it's worth looking at again.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And then, I mean, the upset of the day, the men's pole vault. Like, I won't bury the lead. Mondo Duplantis lost this. So it was quite a windy day, and the wind was in their face, so they were really impacted here. So for context, Curtis Marshall, the Australian, won this, beats Duplantis. We obviously know Mondo is the world record holder at
This is
6:31.
I'm sorry. This is a PR move from Mondo, man. This is. Did he throw it? Did he throw this? It's a PR move, man.
No, he made a mistake, is what happened here to some degree. So he didn't
Okay.
jump. He missed 3 jumps early, right? So the thing to remember here is they're managing fatigue. They've probably got differing amounts for different people, but they'll say somewhere in the vicinity of like 10 jumps in them, good ones. And he ended up needing 3 jumps to clear a low height, Mondo. And so he's used up some of his jumps and he skips ahead. And, he's pretty confident, which is good. And you want him to be confident. But Curtis Marshall ended up clearing. So they both cleared 580. Curtis Marshall clears 590 on his third attempt. And then Mondo went, I'm not going to jump that. I'm going to go to 6 meters to make you jump again. And so he went for 6 meters and triple faulted it at 6:05. So Curtis Marshall has jumped 6 meters, but was not going to do it in the wind. And he ultimately didn't. He had 2 faults at that height. Mondo obviously didn't make it. So as a result of Mondo trying to jump, like leapfrog him, he ends up getting second and Curtis Marshall wins it at 590. So, I mean, tough day with the wind in your face there's a take home message from this, but yeah, I don't know. I don't ever want to say a loss is good for you, but sometimes a loss is good for you. So maybe like I've got a feeling this will motivate Mondo and he'll sort of, yeah, he'll be pissed off and go do his thing. But yeah. Did you catch the 800 mate? This was amazing.
Yes, this kid, man. We've been talking about him for a few months. Nice to see him on the international pro stage now. How do you say his name? Litkenhaus from America.
Correct. Lutkenhouse. Yeah. So Cooper Lutkenhouse, he's just graduated high school. He just finished high school.
17,
Like
I
literally.
think.
Yeah, just finished high school and ran
Yeah.
142.70 in this race, which is unbelievable. He beats Arop, which was a huge win, and just tactically really good. Like, go watch this race. Like, this is maturity beyond his years. Amazing. It's a whole race full of like Olympic and world medalists. The only one really missing was Wanyonyi, and this kid just cruised past. Like, wasn't a thing. Says hi, mum at the end. Ran 142. Unbelievably good tactically. So yeah, that was awesome to see. Really cool to see. And
Also,
then
women's 800, proper race.
it was. We actually got our CMO, Spencer Lauderbeck, sent me a message. I don't know if you were in that group as well. He said, who
Yeah,
paced
I
it better
saw
out of
it.
these two?
You were like the
And
winner.
yeah, well, quite simply, that's the short answer is the winner paced it better because she won. So Audrey Wero beats Keely Hodgkinson here. But interestingly, Wero has actually got a better 400 meter PB. Not by much, but she's 51.03. And remembering Keely's 51 in the teens, I think it's 14. So, enough. So they split this in 55.5, right? That was the halfway split, the 400 meter split. That was the pacing that they requested. That's what they did. Keely was basically on the front. Wero was on the front with her pacemaker. They went through. Keely was sitting there and was like, this is perfect for Keely. And I thought the same thing. And then you see her, Keely pushes to the front at 500 meters. She passes on the back straight, which is, you should pass on the straights for sure. But you only really get one move in an 800 meters. I've heard this said, like, you get one move. You have to play your cards one time. And she played them, and then Wero just played them back and just passed her on that last 100 meters and just looked like she did it easily. So she runs a Diamond League record here. So Wero runs 153.98 to be third all time. Remembering this is outdoors because Keely ran second fastest all time in any conditions in the indoors earlier. So Keely runs 154.33 for a national record. Again, that'll be outdoors. Royce and Willis from the USA ran third in a PB. It was like 157 or 158. So obviously, like, it was a race of two, really. But interestingly, again, you have to race this. You can't pace it, right? Keely's obviously gone a little bit quicker than this. So you got to race this, and she just didn't quite play her cards right. She's also probably a little bit undercooked. I talked about before. She's done a bunch of 400 meter training. I just don't think she's quite got the durability to have that sprint on top of a fast run, right? So like that ability to change pace and really go from it and really support that. And you're always trying to tune, particularly with 800 meters runners, you're trying to tune their sort of glycolytic capacity with their aerobic capacity, right? And she's been doing a bunch of glycolytic work. So it's probably not surprising, but impressive run from Wero. It's the first time Wero's beaten her in a major race. So that's huge. It's good for the sport, right? We lost to some degree. We lost Athing Mo, who's now got a new second name, either hyphenated or not. So my apologies to Athing there, but she got married. But yeah, we kind of lost her. So it's good to have some real competition from Keely, for Keely, right, outside of Georgia Hunter Bell, who's kind of doing the 1500 meters now.
Any other events you quickly want to touch on before we move on?
What did you watch the men's 15? This was really impressive.
No, I missed it, I think.
So another young kid, Cam Myers, is like 19 years old, the Australian. He's unbeaten this year. Period. Full stop. He basically sat on the pacemaker and just led the whole way. And then they're coming around into the straight, and you got like Myers there with Nagoose, Habs, and Chariot, or maybe a bit before the straight, and then Nagoose gets past him in the last 50 meters. It was unbelievable. I thought Nagoose was cooked at that point. I was like, Nagoose needs to go early and make it really hard for him, but he managed to keep past, which I think is a really good sign for Yared Nagoose in terms of his ability to win races in a different way. And again, like you need to have multiple.
He hasn't won in a while,
ways.
if I'm not mistaken. So this is good to see.
He won in Rome.
Oh, did he? Okay.
He won the 1500 in Rome.
Okay.
So he'd been struggling a little bit. You make a good point. Like broadly, your perception is correct, but he did win in Rome, so he's in good form this season. But he won. Rome was a much less competitive race, but it's good for him. Like remembering, we are so far from the Olympics, and in these phases, what you do is you learn to win in different ways, and you try different things, different strategies. So it's good for him to have to win from that spot there. So they ran 3:30, which is quick, but not super quick. But the last 100 meters was a 56:1. So chances are that was taken from Cam's. That would have been where Cam crossed the 400 line. So Yara's probably a little bit quicker than that. So just thinking about how fast you need to be just to be able to be a 1500 meter runner. It's unbelievable. And again, Cam's got a 144 800 meter time. So you just need to be a lightning athlete to win these mile races. So I want to chat about Stahl, the discus thrower. So he's a Swedish discus thrower. He won this over Matt Denny, but they talked about him not really traveling much, although he did win in Tokyo last year. So he's obviously going to travel a bit. But it's made me think, like Nina Kennedy, the Australian pole vaulter, took last year off competition for a similar reason, all the travel. But then there's also this conversation that's happening at the moment with the French rugby players. So some of them might actually go down because they got knocked out. Bordeaux Begler got knocked out. People like Louis PLBRA may go down to New Zealand and play. But there's this big knock on these French rugby players that they've never won or played in New Zealand or the Southern Hemisphere because they don't go on the end of year tours because they need rest after the seasons. And it makes me think about, or it made me think about, like, who are we seeing underperforming due to travel and who thrives on it? And in some sports, you can't really not travel. Like triathlon, you kind of have to go to, in long distance triathlon, you kind of have to travel around. You can sort of do a lot of American races or a lot of European races, but you end up in Kona, right? So maybe the American athletes can have it a little bit better, but you do have to travel a little bit. And I just think, like, it says so much about athletes if they can travel well. Like it requires like adaptability and experience. Like you got to manage time zones, hotels, new food, or adapt to that. And then like the cognitive load of being away, right? Like yes, they get taxied around, but there is a lot of cognitive load there, and then managing like loneliness and that sort of stuff. So there's a real skill to it. I mean, cyclists are pros at this, right? This is like what they do, is just move around. Now, all of their time in Europe for the most part, like, so okay, maybe it's not so bad, but it's still interesting to think about this as what barriers or enablers do you have in this context?
You mentioned cyclists. I've worked with cyclists who predominantly race in Europe, and then when they go to Asia, it's a whole different ball game. It's wide roads, much harder racing to control. It's almost like a different sport, and it's always interesting to see them after the race being animated and talking about that. And to your point, just some handle it better than others. It is a skill, especially when it's a language barrier as well. So like that cognitive load you were talking about, everything takes energy. Everything takes that little bit more energy, and some handle it better than most. Doctor's office. We've got a couple of people in the doctor's office. Gianmarco Tamberi. Why do I know that name?
He's a gold medalist from Tokyo, shared the gold medal in the high jump with Matis Barshim. So he's the Italian high jumper, sometimes shaves half of his face.
Yes, yeah. Entertaining guy, entertaining. Yes.
Very. So he wasn't in the Rome Diamond League, and they were saying he's got plantar fasciitis. So, shout out to the CMO, Spencer Ladderbeck, who's had a bit of a case of plantar fasciitis himself. But this is interesting because he's a high jumper. It's a classic overuse type injury. And so my assumption is this is probably his takeoff foot. And so it must be pretty debilitating for him. because there's certainly limits to what you can do in a spike. I treated a couple of high jumpers, and there are so many regulations on their spikes, what they can and can't be. So this must be a bit of a nightmare to get rid of for him. But yeah, best wishes to Gianmarco, and hopefully he's back jumping soon, because he's really important for the sport, I think.
Can you change your takeoff foot? Probably not. Probably a whole lot of work to go into that to change your whole
It's
technique.
like, yeah, well, it's similar to saying, can you change to you kick with the other foot? It's like you can, but it's not great, right?
Not
Like you
as
kind of have
effective.
one that's a dominant foot. Yeah, it's you kind of have this
And
dominant
then,
foot, and I heard Hamish Kerr, the gold medalist from from Paris, talking on a podcast. He said his double leg vertical jump was only a handful of centimeters more than his single leg takeoff, like his takeoff leg vertical jump. So like he did something like I think it was something like an 80 centimeter 2-footed vertical jump, and then like a 77 centimeter off 1 foot, which is absurd.
it's
Like one
power.
foot vertical jump that high, like I would be very happy with that sort of height off 2 feet. So it's really
That
impressive.
is power. And then I'm sad to see Christian Erikson in the doctor's office, but it is something I have been worried about for a while. But you give us context. What happened here?
So Denmark, who he plays for internationally, was playing against Ukraine in a friendly in Ukraine, and he's had listeners who are like, who's this guy? He collapsed during, I don't know which Euros it was. Was it 2022, 2020?
Yeah, around about there. I'd say
Some
about
there.
6 years ago ish.
Collapsed in the Euros, had CPR in the field and saved his life, basically. His heart stopped. I don't know if we talked about it at the time. I don't know if we were on the podcast at the time. It was before the podcast, so we wouldn't have talked about it. But anyway, so it's quite shocking. He then got an ICD put in there, which is called an implantable cardioverter defibrillator. That's what this is. So basically, this will sense your heart rhythm and shock you if you need. It was in 2021, after his 2021 collapse, sorry, is what we have here. So this meant he couldn't actually play in Italy. I think he was contracted to one of the
Yeah.
Italian clubs, couldn't play there, and then ended
Yeah,
up
we've
playing
talked about
in
this. Yeah.
ended up playing in the UK,
And Manchester
amongst other
United.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, amongst other teams. So then during the 65th minute on Saturday, he held his chest and fell to the ground, which is always a bad sign. So he was briefly unconscious, and the match was halted and obviously abandoned. And he posted on Instagram, thankfully, saying, I want to let everyone know I'm doing well. I'm home with my family. As you can imagine, received a shock from my ICD. So he said he got shocked by it. We'll talk about what that means. It's had a major impact on both me and my family, but I want to reassure everyone that the situation, this was a different situation to what happened in 2021. Now home and discharged from hospital. So what happens is there are certain rhythms that heart rhythms that are dangerous, and then if we shock you with electricity, as you see, that in the classic medical dramas are clear, like that's kind of what happens. So you can implant these devices that automatically sense the rhythm, and if it's warranted, they shock you. But the problem with this is, it's painful to get a shock, right? And it's quite shocking without wanting to, no pun intended here. So he probably collapsed as a result of his arrhythmia, and then received a shock on the ground, and was probably unconscious as a result of that, or on the shock on the way down. So he's probably had a brief period of unconsciousness, because the rhythms are generally such that it means that your heart is not being efficient, so there's not oxygen getting to your brain. So it's probably why he collapsed. So it's quite scary.
I watched countless hours of him playing with this as he was a Manchester United player, and it's something I've been concerned about for a long time. And I was like, oh, he's coming towards the end of his career. He's left Manchester United now. He survived that, and then out of nowhere, I saw this news, and I was like, oh man. And it's hard, but I do think he just needs to retire now. He probably just needs to retire and come, and that's hard. It's hard as an athlete, but I think I'm not speaking medically, but two major collapses in big visible games like that is not good for your family. It's not good for them to see. It's probably time to pull the plug.
Yeah, I saw some commentary from some smart people on LinkedIn about this, and there's going to be debate about like whether you're allowed to play with these devices and what that means and all those things. Like, I think, yeah, it's probably going to end up where you have to go case by case on these, and people make decisions based on the situation and the arrhythmia and the genesis of it. It gets cardiac physiology gets very, very complicated very, very quickly. So,
It's
and
interesting that Italy has
ECGs,
a blanket rule, like not allowed to have a
Italy's
pro contract.
very cardiovascular risk averse. So if you want to go do a race in Italy of any type, you have to get a letter from your doctor with an ECG, amongst other things. And there's a
I
full
remember we
cardiac
talked
screening
about
protocol.
someone trying to do a
Yeah.
5K, yeah, a park run, yeah.
Well, no, they don't have parkrun because there's no community level sport without this. This is the
Oh
point.
wow.
So,
Okay.
like, if you want to play community level, like you're an 8-year old, a 15-year-old kid, you have to get screened. So, like, there's a lot of risk aversion in that respect, and probably as with good reason. But the point being, it's always interesting to me in the Mont Blanc region. And Mont Blanc, for those who don't know geography, has basically has, and this is the Ultra Trail du Mont Blanc does a route of the mountain. You go from France to Switzerland, from France to Italy to Switzerland and back to France. If you started that race, if it was an Italian race, you started in Italy, yeah, you'd need a whole bunch of forms signed and assessments done. If you started in France, you need a letter from your doctor saying you're okay. And if you started in Switzerland, you just need a credit card. So like it's completely different. It's completely different risk profiles in that area. So yeah,
Uh,
it's quite interesting to think about that. And I often like giggle at that thought.
that's hilarious. Seen on social. Do we have something for seen on social this week?
Yeah, I sent this. I thought this was an interesting point to bring up here because I think people will be interested by this. And most people probably would have seen this. So Chinese social media, which is very different to ours, they have their own platforms, but it's limiting influencers based on their qualifications. Right. So basically, their cyberspace administration introduced a new rule that those discussing topics like medicine and health, finance and investing, law and legal advice, or education, they need a degree in those
Wow.
fields.
Interesting.
Platforms must verify qualifications or face big fines. So I think it's understandable because bad advice in these spaces is horrible, right? It can really create havoc. The challenge is like qualifications are only one part of it, right? Like you need experience as well. It's really hard. And I say this as somebody who has a degree in medicine, right? And so like I'd be able to talk, right? But I'm very aware of my limitations and I'm very concerned about this. And people hear this, like I often say, it's like not about being right, it's about getting it right. And I think it's really important to acknowledge weak points and potential fallibility and all these things. So it's really hard here. So there's an interesting point here, like there was a question on this post that said, "Is your for influencers, is your authority built on what you know, or the fact that nobody's stopping you saying it yet?" Which I think is really interesting. That's kind of
Wow.
it's kind of the thought behind seeing on social is us like seeing people say stuff and being like, let's just like maybe just like tweak that a little bit. And again, I don't want everyone to become super risk averse because I think there's people adding a lot of value. But there is some nuance here, and it is very difficult. And like you do need to be careful where you get your information from and how you do this. Ironically, I prior to this had a newsletter drafted on this that'll come out in the next couple of
Wow,
weeks.
two sound
So
effects in one episode. That's a record. That's
yeah,
the first time this has ever happened. But
yeah.
I mean, this is interesting. I don't want to call Stephen Bartlett out because I really enjoy his podcast. I watched one this week, but
I
I'll
don't
use
want to
that as
call him
an
out.
example. I'm just going to use it as an example. He's got experts on there. I'm not an expert. I don't have anything close to a medical degree. I appreciate having you here. So when we have guests on, you can go toe to toe with them and ask the relevant questions and ask relevant follow up questions. Someone like him, all the research in the world that his team does, and they're well researched and the topics are interesting. But often there are guests on who say something where it validates, it's asking for a follow up question, and he doesn't have the expertise and the knowledge to do that. But his podcast is so popular and so well packaged that eventually you think that it has the authority to talk about all these various topics when in some cases they might get it wrong. I mean, that's a big example. And as I say, I'm not calling him out, I'm just trying to give context.
Well, I mean, the question is like, do you have an obligation to push back, right? Because there is criticism leveled at Stephen by other people and people like Joe Rogan and other people. Like, should you be pushing back on guests? And it's a very difficult line to walk. And I am fortunate that I haven't had to walk that much. But if you listen to the ketones episode with Ator, I sort of say like, hey, I'd actually, and I try and sort of, I actually see it this way, which is really hard to do, especially
Mm.
with Ator, because I get on with Ator well. I consider him a colleague. I respect him greatly. And it's like, well, actually, this is how and he ended up agreeing with me. But how do you push back is really difficult when you don't necessarily agree with somebody, right? So, um, it's I think about this a lot because there is an obligation for podcasts, I think, to potentially share both sides of a story, right? let's call it high carb versus low carb, right? As an example, how do you push back appropriately, and how do you make it appropriate, right? So, or an example for us. So we had Professor Alex Coates on. She was talking about Red S and how important Red S is. All right, and then we had Jose Areta come on talking about how an energy deficit isn't that bad, right? And those two things can look at odds with each other. But it's important that you sort of discern it out, right? And you don't have to pick sides, and you don't have to do that, but you do need to ask the right questions so that people who are listening can like sort of appreciate the situation. And maybe you need to try and clarify and provide a middle ground for people so they can navigate it themselves. But it's something I'm very acutely aware of, and it's a very difficult line to walk. But I do think there are a group of academics who have these qualifications that give advice that's pretty bad because they don't have experience. And I think there are similarly a group of practitioners who have great experience that I think give great advice. And then there's anything between where there are people without experience and without advice and without qualifications. There are people, giving all sorts of stuff. So they're neither are necessary nor sufficient. I think it's probably both and, not either or.
Your points are very well made. I wonder how China will police something like this. Be interesting to see
So
how it works out.
The platform verifies that you have the qualifications and allows you to speak in that space. And obviously they're using AI to know if you're speaking that. And if they don't verify you, then the platform gets fined.
Okay, interesting. I'm interested in the long-term outcomes of that, how that looks long-term. Let's keep an eye on it. Before we go, what are we watching this weekend? Well, the Football World Cup kicks off on Thursday. Once this is out already, South Africa would have beaten Mexico in the opening game of the Football World Cup, which is cool. So I'll be watching that this weekend.
The game times are terrible. I was looking at this. They are horrific.
Yeah, some of them are really bad. I really want to watch Brazil. I love watching Brazil play football, but all of their matches are like beyond midnight my time, so I'm not staying up for that. The South African, the opening game isn't too bad. It's 9 p.m. my time, 8
9 p.m.
your time in the
kickoff.
UK. Yeah.
Mate, you're getting to bed at like midnight.
11, game will last about 2 hours, but it's
terrible.
It's bad. It's bad for sleep.
I'll end up doing what I always do, which is watching these things on replay and avoiding social media, some of the games. But I kind of miss it. Like, and I'm speaking as a spoiled brat, but I remember watching, like, sitting for some World Cups and watching like almost all the games that are of interest to me. And like, it's just not going to happen this time. I'm going to pick and choose one or two.
Some of them are at 6 p.m. and European time, so some of them are decent, but most of them obviously being in the America region.
Yeah,
I'm also watching the Dauphiné will be finishing this weekend, and I'll be watching Team Omani, first ever UCI Women's African team racing in Tour de Feminine in the Pyrenees. I'll be watching that this weekend. What are you watching?
So we're recording this on Tuesday. On a Wednesday, there's a Diamond League. So in Oslo, so I'll watch that. That's Bislett Games. It's usually a good one, particularly for, I think there's a mile there, so that'll be interesting. So you should definitely keep an eye on that. And then I'll catch a little bit of the World Cup, but not all of it. I'm not that interested. Like I'm a soft core football fan. I'll watch it. I'm kind of interested in this. I don't know if you caught this, like the USA and has been talking a lot of smack to the Australians, and in my experience, that's not a good thing to do. You should probably not poke the bear. Now, the USA probably still win that. They should win that. They have a much better team on paper, but that's the problem. Australians love being an underdog, and they love when people have sort of said something like this. So I don't think it's wise for the Americans.
I don't know. That meme is coming to mind where two people are fighting. Neither of them are very good, and the fight is awful, and no one's getting hurt because neither of them are good. That's the meme that's coming to mind with US versus Oz.
Just checking how many times the South Africa's made the quarters.
Listen, it's time to wrap this episode up. It's way too long. Let's get out of here. Thanks so much for listening. We publish a new episode every single Friday. Make sure you subscribe, share this with a friend. David, thanks so much for putting this together.
Thanks, mate. You take care.
We'll catch you on the next one.